This is my true story. I worked my whole life to give my son a good future. I thought he would respect me when I became old. But I was wrong. One night, while I was sleeping, my own son poured cold water on my face. I woke up shaking, wet, and broken inside. He laughed at me and called me useless. In that moment, I knew I had to act. I had to stop his cruelty. What I did next shocked everyone. Before I tell you, write in the comments where you are watching from and please subscribe. All my life was sacrifice. From the day my son was born, I forgot about myself. I stopped thinking about my own dreams, my own wants, and my own comfort. Everything became about him. I worked in harsh jobs, long hours, tired days, and painful nights just so he could live in comfort. I carried heavy loads. I walked in the sun until my skin burned. I stood in factories breathing smoke and dust. My hands were rough, cut, and broken. My back hurt every single day. But I kept going. Why? Because I wanted my son to have what I never had. I grew up poor. I grew up hungry. Many nights I went to bed with nothing to eat. My shoes had holes, my clothes were torn, and my school days ended early because there was no money. I promised myself that my son would never face that life. I promised that his stomach would always be full, that his clothes would be clean, that he would go to school, and that he would never taste the pain of poverty. That promise became the reason I woke up every day. When he was small, I carried him in my arms, even when I was tired. I fed him first, and only after he was full did I eat what was left. Sometimes there was nothing left for me. I told myself it was fine. A father must be hungry so his child can grow strong. When he was sick with fever, I stayed awake all night, holding a wet cloth to his head, whispering to him that he would be okay. I went to work the next morning with no sleep, but I did not complain. My son's health was more important than my body's rest. As he grew older, his needs grew too. He wanted books, uniforms, toys, and later, expensive things. He wanted new shoes like his friends. He wanted a bicycle. Later, he wanted a car. I could not always afford it, but I pushed myself harder. I took extra jobs. I skipped meals. I sold things I cared about. I borrowed money. Each time, I told myself it was worth it. My son's smile was worth my pain. His future was worth my suffering. I paid for his school. I paid for his college. When he failed in business once, I paid his debts. When he wanted to marry, I gave him money for the wedding. I even helped him buy his house. Every time he needed help, I was there. I never said no. I thought, this is what fathers do. They carry their children on their shoulders. They give until there is nothing left. And I believed one day when I was old, he would remember. He would care for me. He would show me respect. For many years, I saved money little by little. Every week, I put something aside. Sometimes it was only a few dollars, sometimes more, but I never touched it. I wanted that money to be my son's future. I built it slowly, carefully, until it became something large. It became an inheritance, $1.2 million in total value. That money was my blood and sweat. It was my life's work. My dream was that one day my son would have it, and he would understand the price I paid for it. I thought he would use it well, take care of his own children with it, and always keep my memory with pride. I expected gratitude. I expected love. I expected that when I was weak, he would give me food. When I was tired, he would give me rest. When I was old, he would give me respect. That was all I wanted. Not more money, not more things, only love and honor from the boy I raised. But life does not always give us what we expect. Instead of gratitude, I received cruelty. Instead of honor, I received humiliation. Instead of respect, I received laughter on my face. I spent my whole life building him up, and when I became weak, he pushed me down. That is the truth of my sacrifice, and that is why his betrayal cut me so deeply. Arrogance does not appear in one day. It grows slowly, little by little, until it becomes too big to hide. My son was not always cruel. At first, he was only careless. He would speak with a sharp tone or roll his eyes when I gave him advice. I told myself it was nothing. Young men can be impatient. They believe they know everything. I thought it was only his age, that he would learn respect again as he grew older. But instead of learning, his arrogance grew stronger. He stopped listening to me. When I spoke, he would cut me off. When I reminded him of life lessons, he would laugh and say I was old and did not understand the new world. He forgot that it was my hard work that gave him the chance to live in that new world. He began treating me as if I was a burden in his house, like an unwanted guest who had stayed too long. At first it was small. He would make comments about how slowly I walked, about how my hands shook when I tried to hold a glass, or about how my hearing was not sharp anymore. He turned my age into a joke. His wife sometimes laughed with him, sometimes looked away in silence. I stayed quiet. I told myself, he is my son. I must not answer back. One day he will realize. But he never realized. Soon the insults grew stronger. He began making fun of me in front of visitors. When his friends came, he would say things like, "My father is old and useless." They laughed, and he smiled proudly, as if humiliating me made him greater. I lowered my head and stayed silent, but inside, my heart broke piece by piece. Each word was like a knife. He was cutting away the respect a son should give a father. Inside the house, I became more like a servant than a parent. He asked me to clean, to carry, to do chores. He never said thank you. He never looked at me with respect. When I made mistakes, he shouted at me. When I was slow, he mocked me. He forgot every night I stayed hungry for him, every coin I saved for him, every debt I carried for him. In his eyes, none of that mattered anymore. Arrogance changed him. He began to believe he was better than everyone else, even me. He forgot where he came from. He forgot the dirt floors he once played on, the second-hand clothes he once wore, the nights he once cried because there was no food. He thought the life he had now was his own achievement. He showed off his car, his house, his clothes, and he thought it was all his power. But he forgot. It was my money, my savings, my sacrifice that built those things. He only enjoyed them. He never earned them. Sometimes I looked at him and asked myself, where did I go wrong? Did I give him too much? Did I protect him too much from pain? Did I make his life too easy? Maybe if he had suffered a little, he would have learned respect. But because he never tasted hunger, he never learned the value of food. Because he never lived without, he never learned gratitude. Because he was raised in comfort, he learned only arrogance. The saddest part was not only his words, but the way he looked at me. His eyes no longer showed love. They showed annoyance, even hatred. When I entered a room, he frowned. When I spoke, he rolled his eyes. When I ate, he looked at me as if I was taking something away from him. My own son, the boy I once cradled in my arms, now saw me as a problem, as a weight he did not want. Arrogance blinded him. He could not see that one day he too would grow old. One day his hands would shake, his legs would weaken, his voice would tremble. And maybe his children would look at him the same way he looked at me. But at that time, I was still alive, and I was still his father. I deserved respect. Instead, I received mockery. That arrogance prepared the way for something worse. If insults were not enough, he wanted to show his power in action. He wanted to prove to himself and to others that he had complete control over me. And one night, he showed me just how low his arrogance had taken him. It was night when his cruelty showed its worst face. I was sleeping in my room, tired after a long day. My body was weak, my eyes were heavy, and I had finally closed them for rest. In sleep, I was peaceful, far away from insults, far away from pain. But suddenly, I felt shock on my face. Ice-cold water poured over me, wetting my hair, my clothes, and my blanket. I opened my eyes quickly, gasping for air, shivering from the freezing touch. For a moment, I did not understand. I thought maybe it was a dream, maybe something spilled by mistake. But it was not a mistake. It was not a dream. It was cruelty planned by my own son. When my eyes adjusted, I saw him standing over me. In his hand was the glass. On his face was not worry or regret, but laughter. He had poured the water on me while I slept. He wanted to see me suffer. He wanted to see me broken. I sat there, wet and shaking, too shocked to speak. He looked at me with a sneer, as if I was not his father, but a joke lying in front of him. And then came the words that hurt more than the water. He said, "Wake up, old man. You are pathetic." His voice was cold, his tone filled with pride. He laughed loudly, the sound echoing in the room like thunder, while I sat there drenched, silent, and ashamed. The water dripped from my face to the floor, each drop like a reminder of how low I had been pushed. My blanket clung to my body, heavy and wet. My pillow was soaked. My bed, the only place where I found a little peace, was ruined. I sat there helpless, not because I had no strength, but because my heart had been crushed. I had faced hunger. I had faced pain. I had faced hard labor all my life. But never did I think I would face this from my own child. He left the room still laughing, his footsteps loud as he walked away. His wife's faint giggle joined his. They found joy in my pain, amusement in my humiliation. I stayed in that cold bed, water dripping down my skin, and for the first time in many years, I cried. Not tears of weakness, but tears of heartbreak. This was the boy I gave my life to. This was the boy I worked for, suffered for, built everything for. And now, this was the man who treated me worse than a stranger, worse than a beggar in the street. The cold water felt like knives against my old skin. But colder than the water was his heart. I remembered when he was small, when he had fever and sweat poured from his body. I sat by his side all night with a wet cloth, gently cooling his head, whispering comfort, praying for his health. I gave him water when he was thirsty. I wiped his face when he cried. I kept him warm when he was cold. And now, years later, that same sun poured cold water on me, not to save me, but to hurt me. I could not sleep again that night. The bed was wet, the room was heavy with shame. I sat in a chair until morning, staring at the wall, thinking of everything. Each thought stabbed me like a blade. I asked myself, how could he do this? Why did he hate me so much? What had I done to deserve this? All I ever gave him was love, food, money, a future. I gave him everything, and in return he gave me water in the face, laughter in my ears, and pain in my heart. That night showed me the truth. My son no longer saw me as his father. He no longer saw me as a man. To him I was only a body to mock, an old shadow to humiliate. He had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. I knew then that I could not wait for respect. I could not hope for change. I had to act. And my act would not be with anger, not with fists, but with something far greater, something he had forgotten, my power over his future. The night of cold water never left me. Even after the wet blanket dried, even after my clothes were changed, the pain stayed inside me. My skin could forget the chill, but my heart could not forget the insult. I sat alone in my small chair, the house dark and silent, and I felt like the world had ended. The boy I once cradled in my arms had turned into a man who laughed while I shook with cold. The child I once fed from my own plate now poured water on me like I was trash. I wiped my face slowly that night, but the water was nothing compared to the tears that followed. My eyes burned as I remembered all the years of sacrifice. I remembered holding him in my arms when he had fever, rocking him to sleep when he cried, staying awake when he was sick. I remembered working through nights, carrying heavy loads, and coming home only to fall on the floor, too tired to eat. And yet, I still smiled when he hugged me. I remembered skipping meals so he could eat, pretending I wasn't hungry so he would never know the truth. Those memories felt like knives now, because the boy I saved from hunger was the man who left me wet, shivering, and humiliated. I sat there, hour after hour, my chest heavy with grief. The pain was not just from his cruelty, but from the thought that he truly believed I was nothing. He called me pathetic. He looked at me like I was useless. And maybe, in his eyes, I was. Old age had made my hands shake, my back weak, and my steps slow. But inside, I was still the man who built his world. Inside, I was still the father who worked until his body broke, just so his son could live in comfort. Inside, I was still the same man. But he refused to see it. The quiet of that night was the loudest silence I had ever known. My mind replayed everything again and again. His laughter echoed in my ears. The sound of the water hitting my face replayed like a cruel drum. I wanted to sleep, but my body refused. Pain kept me awake. Shame kept me awake. And one question kept circling in my mind. How could he do this to me? By morning, my eyes were red, my head heavy, and my heart broken. I looked in the mirror and saw not just an old man, but a father carrying scars no one could see. My face showed wrinkles of age, but inside, I carried deeper lines carved by betrayal. I told myself I could never forget. I could never forgive. Some insults can be washed away. Some wounds can be healed. But what my son did that night was not just insult. It was rejection. He rejected me as his father, as his blood, as a man who ever mattered. Still, I did not shout. I did not fight. I stayed quiet. I carried my pain in silence. Because I knew something he had forgotten. The inheritance. The $1.2 million I had saved, the estate I had built, the wealth I had kept aside for him, all of it was still mine. He thought he had crushed me. He thought he had all the power. But the truth was, I had one final power left, one last weapon, the choice of who would hold my legacy when I was gone. That quiet pain became my strength. That night of humiliation became my reason. And in that silence, I decided, he would not win. My son thought he had all the power. He believed that because I was old, weak, and living in his house, I had nothing left. He thought respect was gone, love was gone, and control was gone. But he forgot one truth. The inheritance was still mine. The money, the estate, the savings, $1.2 million in total. All of it was under my name. The papers, the signatures, the control of that wealth rested with me. He mocked me like I was powerless, but in reality, I was still the one who held the key to his future. This was the secret power I had. It was not strength in my hands. My body was tired, my back hurt, my legs were slow, my voice was weak, but my power was not in my body anymore. It was in my decisions. One pen stroke from me could build a life, or it could destroy one. My son forgot that. He looked at me as if I was finished, as if my only value was in obeying his cruel commands. But the truth was, everything he expected in his future still depended on me. He bragged about what he would do with my money after I was gone. I heard him sometimes talk with his wife about the cars he would buy, the trips he would take, the businesses he would start. He already lived in a dream world where the inheritance was his. He believed it was guaranteed. But it was not. He thought my silence meant weakness, but my silence was patience. He thought my old age meant I had no choice, but my old age meant I had seen enough to know exactly what choice to make. I remembered every insult he gave me, every time he mocked me, every time he looked at me with disgust. Each one was like a stone, and I carried those stones on my back in silence. But with each stone, my decision grew stronger. He poured water on my face and called me pathetic. But the real pathetic truth was this. His future was in my hands, not his. The secret power gave me calmness. While he laughed, I thought of the will that still carried my name. While he insulted me, I thought of the accounts that still had my signature. While he believed he had crushed me, I smiled inside, knowing he had no idea what was coming. He thought cruelty was power. But real power was the quiet ability to erase him from everything he thought was his. It made me remember the stepson he always ridiculed. The boy from my wife's side, the one my son mocked and pushed aside. That stepson, though not from my blood, always showed me respect. He greeted me kindly. He listened when I spoke. He never called me names. He never mocked my weakness. He was poor, yes. He did not have the advantages my son had. But he had something my son had lost. Gratitude. That night, when I sat in pain, I realized my legacy did not need to go to cruelty. It could go to respect. It could go to someone who valued me, not someone who shamed me. The $1.2 million did not have to be wasted on a son who hated me. It could be given to someone who knew its worth, someone who knew my worth. And that was my power. The quiet, secret power that my son could not see. He thought I was finished. But I was about to show him that I was still the one holding the pen. The night of water, the night of shame, and the long hours of silence gave me time to think. By morning, my mind was clear. I was no longer just a father hoping for respect. I was a man ready to make a choice. My son had crossed the final line. He had broken the bond that no father and son should ever break. He had spit on my years of sacrifice with laughter. He had thrown away the love I gave him by calling me pathetic. He thought I would remain weak forever, but he was wrong. The decision grew in my heart slowly, like fire rising from ashes. I told myself, enough is enough. I had lived my whole life giving to him, but now it was time to take back control. I did not need to fight him with my hands. I did not need to shout, argue, or waste my breath. My power was quiet, simple, and strong. It was the inheritance. It was the $1.2 million I had saved with sweat, blood, and pain. And it was still mine. That morning, I put on my old jacket and walked to my lawyer's office. My steps were slow, but each one was steady. I carried the weight of betrayal on my shoulders, but I also carried the strength of resolve in my chest. When I reached his office, I sat down across from him. He looked at me kindly, waiting for my words. For a moment I stayed silent, the memory of my son's laughter burning in my ears. Then I spoke clearly. I wanted to change my will. The lawyer nodded. He had known me for years. He had seen me build my savings, protect my family, and plan carefully for the future. He asked me if I was sure. I said yes. There was no doubt in my heart. My son no longer deserved my inheritance. The man who poured water on my face, the man who mocked me as pathetic, would not be rewarded with my life's work. Instead, I wanted to give everything, every account, every bond, every property, to my stepson. The lawyer began to prepare the papers. I watched the pen in his hand, moving across the page, each word like a nail closing the door on my son's arrogance. My hands shook slightly when he placed the documents before me, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. This was not just paper. This was justice. This was revenge made permanent. This was the shift of power from cruelty to respect. I held the pen tightly. My fingers were old, my skin wrinkled, but my will was strong. I signed my name slowly, carefully, each stroke of the pen a release of pain. When the last page was done, I placed the pen down and felt something lift from me. For the first time in years, I felt free. I had made my decision, and it was final. The inheritance now belonged to the stepson, the one who never mocked me, the one who never laughed at my weakness, the one who still saw me as a father, even if I was not his by blood. My son would learn too late that arrogance comes with a cost, disrespect comes with a price, and betrayal carries punishment. I walked out of the lawyer's office with the sun on my face, my body tired, but my heart alive. The decision had been made. The power was mine again. Life has strange ways of turning. Sometimes fate moves quietly, like the wind. Sometimes it moves like a storm, changing everything in one moment. For me, the twist of fate came the day I signed my new will. My son thought his future was guaranteed. He walked proudly, speaking as if he already owned my savings, my house, my estate. He believed nothing could change it. But he was wrong. While he laughed at me, while he mocked me, I had taken away everything with one pen stroke. His $1.2 million inheritance was no longer his. The stepson, the boy my son always mocked, became the one who would receive it all. When I told him, his eyes filled with shock. He did not expect it. He had never asked for it. He had lived his life in simple ways, always working with what little he had. Unlike my son, he did not feel entitled. He never spoke about my money. He never planned his life around my estate. All he gave me was respect. All he showed me was kindness. And that was enough for me. When I explained what I had done, he sat quietly at first. Then he held my hand with tears in his eyes and said he would never forget my trust. He promised he would honor my name, take care of me in my last years, and use the inheritance wisely. In his voice, I heard honesty. In his eyes, I saw gratitude. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. It was not rage that guided my choice. It was not revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice. It was redirection. Why should my life's work go to someone who spat on me, laughed at me, and treated me worse than a stranger? Why should my money reward cruelty? Instead, I chose to give it to the one who had shown me dignity. The stepson, who had no blood ties to me, had acted more like a son than the boy I raised. That was the twist of fate. Blood did not decide who was worthy. Actions did. My true heir was not the one who carried my name, but the one who carried respect in his heart. My son thought I was weak. He thought I had no power. But with one choice, I proved him wrong. Fate turned its back on his arrogance and smiled on the stepson he despised. I slept better that night than I had in many years. I knew that my money, my property, my savings were safe. I knew they would not be wasted on arrogance, but used by someone who valued them. And in that quiet, I realized something greater. Justice does not always shout. Sometimes justice whispers. Sometimes it moves in silence, but its impact is loud. That was my twist of fate, turning cruelty into emptiness for my son, and turning kindness into reward for my stepson. The truth always comes out. It may take time, but one day it always shows itself. For my son, the truth came like a slap to the face. He had walked through life so sure of himself, so proud, so certain that the $1.2 million inheritance was his future. He had already spoken to his friends about the house he would rebuild, the cars he would buy, the trips he would take. He lived as if the money was already in his pocket. He mocked me without fear, because he believed I had no choice but to leave it all to him. But then the day came when he learned the truth. When the will change became known, his world collapsed. He came into the room shouting, his face red, his eyes filled with fury. He demanded answers. He called me names, far worse than before. He screamed that I was heartless, that I was betraying my own blood. He stomped his feet like a child, forgetting that he was a grown man. His wife stood behind him, her face pale with shock, but she did not speak. She had seen his cruelty too. She knew what he had done. I sat quietly and listened. I did not shout back. I did not argue. I did not let his fury shake me. I had already made my decision. The papers were signed. The lawyer had the will. Nothing he said could undo it. My silence hurt him more than any words could. He wanted me to fight. He wanted me to lose control. Instead, I stayed calm. That calmness showed him he had truly lost. His anger grew into desperation. He begged, then cursed, then begged again. But none of it mattered. My son, the man who poured cold water on my face while I slept, was now the one drowning in his own panic. He realized too late that arrogance has a price. He realized too late that cruelty comes back like a shadow. He had treated me like a joke, and now he was the one who looked like a fool. The family began to talk. Relatives who once believed his lies now whispered about what he had done. They remembered the insults, the way he mocked me in front of others. They saw the truth clearly now. He had brought this punishment on himself. Some shook their heads in disgust. Some avoided him completely. His pride, once so large, now turned into shame. Even his friends, the ones who laughed when he mocked me, began to step back. They did not want to stand beside a man who had lost everything. They saw him as weak, foolish, and broken. The respect he thought he had in their eyes disappeared overnight. All he had left was anger, and anger does not feed a man. Anger does not buy food. Anger does not bring back what is lost. That was the fallout. My son, who believed the future was his, was left with nothing. His words could not change it. His shouts could not break it. His insults no longer mattered. The inheritance was gone from his hands forever, and he could not touch it. After the will was changed, after the shouting was done, life in the house was no longer the same. My son walked around like a storm with no rain, all noise and no power. His face stayed hard, his words stayed sharp, But his strength was gone. He knew it, and I knew it too. The inheritance, the $1.2 million he thought was his right, was gone forever. What he had poured cold water on that night was not just my face. It was his own future. Relatives who once praised him turned their backs. They spoke behind closed doors about what he had done. They asked each other how a son could treat his father that way, how he could call me pathetic, how he could laugh at an old man who gave him everything. Their answers were always the same: arrogance. They said arrogance had blinded him, arrogance had destroyed him. No one defended him anymore. Not even his wife, who once laughed at his cruel jokes, could stand by him. She sat in silence most days, avoiding his gaze, ashamed of the man she had married. The respect he once demanded from others was gone. His friends stopped visiting. The laughter that once filled his evenings disappeared. The neighbors whispered when he passed, pointing and shaking their heads. His name, once spoken with pride, was now tied to shame. He had become the man who lost everything, not because of bad luck, but because of his own cruelty. Meanwhile, I found peace. I no longer cared about his anger, his shouts, or his insults. I had made my choice, and that choice gave me strength. I ate my meals slowly, each bite a reminder that I was no longer under his control. I walked through the house with dignity, knowing that I had secured my legacy for someone who deserved it. My stepson visited often, bringing small gifts, sharing kind words, treating me with the respect I thought I had lost forever. In his presence, I felt seen. In his respect, I found comfort. The inheritance shift had changed more than money. It had changed power. My son no longer had control over me. He could not threaten me because he had nothing left to threaten with. He could not mock me because his own life was now a joke. He could not take from me because I had already taken everything back. The balance had shifted. I was no longer the broken old man he thought I was. I was the father who had shown him that cruelty has consequences. As days turned into weeks, the aftermath became clear. My son's pride had been crushed. His arrogance had been destroyed. He was left standing in the ruins of his own making. And I, the man he mocked, lived in peace. After the will was changed, after the shouting was done, life in the house was no longer the same. My son walked around like a storm with no rain, all noise and no power. His face stayed hard, his words stayed sharp, but his strength was gone. He knew it, and I knew it too. The inheritance, the $1.2 million he thought was his right, was gone forever. What he had poured cold water on that night was not just my face, it was his own future. Relatives who once praised him turned their backs. They spoke behind closed doors about what he had done. They asked each other how a son could treat his father that way, how he could call me pathetic, how he could laugh at an old man who gave him everything. Their answers were always the same: arrogance. They said arrogance had blinded him, arrogance had destroyed him. No one defended him anymore. Not even his wife, who once laughed at his cruel jokes, could stand by him. She sat in silence most days, avoiding his gaze, ashamed of the man she had married. The respect he once demanded from others was gone. His friends stopped visiting. The laughter that once filled his evenings disappeared. The neighbors whispered when he passed, pointing and shaking their heads. His name, once spoken with pride, was now tied to shame. He had become the man who lost everything, not because of bad luck, but because of his own cruelty. Meanwhile, I found peace. I no longer cared about his anger, his shouts, or his insults. I had made my choice, and that choice gave me strength. I ate my meals slowly, each bite a reminder that I was no longer under his control. I walked through the house with dignity, knowing that I had secured my legacy for someone who deserved it. My stepson visited often, bringing small gifts, sharing kind words, treating me with the respect I thought I had lost forever. In his presence, I felt seen. In his respect, I found comfort. The inheritance shift had changed more than money. It had changed power. My son no longer had control over me. He could not threaten me because he had nothing left to threaten with. He could not mock me because his own life was now a joke. He could not take from me because I had already taken everything back. The balance had shifted. I was no longer the broken old man he thought I was. I was the father who had shown him that cruelty has consequences. As days turned into weeks, the aftermath became clear. My son's pride had been crushed. His arrogance had been destroyed. He was left standing in the ruins of his own making. And I, the man he mocked, lived in peace.